afternoon, good evening, good morning. A warm welcome to everyone who is listening or attending this webinar with the occasion of a book launch on female genital mutilation in Africa, Politics of Criminalization, a book that is edited by Satang Nabaneh and with a contribution with wonderful colleagues, some of them who are here today. My name is Esther Kismödi. I am the Chief Executive of Sexual and Reproductive Health Matters. That is also an organization that is holding the SRHM journal. I am warmly welcoming our guests today. Satang Nabaneh is the editor of the book, director of programs and assistant professor of practice at University of Dayton Human Rights Center and postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Human Rights Faculty of Law, University of Pretoria. Hello, Satang, and you are joining us on a live class with your students, right?
Yes, I am. And good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening. And hi, everyone. Hi, hello to all the students, the incredible students. I know you cannot see them, but they were here right up very early in the morning in the class. It's a combination of two classes, an intro to human rights, as well as the gender, women rights, and global politics class. So many thanks again, Esther, for having us alongside the contributor and author to talk about the fantastic book, and which we're also spotlighting here as well in hard copy. So yeah, delighted to be here.
It's also behind me. So thank you so much for being here. I also would like to welcome Angela J. Dawson, professor at University of Technology and joining from Sydney very, very late. Thank you, Angela, for being here with us.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Samia Kimani, who is a health expert, researcher, and associate professor, Faculty of Health at the University of Nairobi, and at the Africa Center for Abandonment of Female Genital Mutilation and Cutting. Hello, Samia. You are joining from Mombasa, Kenya.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be part of this team. Thank you.
And welcome for Laura Nyirikindi, who is a human rights lawyer from Uganda and joining from Kampala, Uganda. Hello, Laura.
Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Satang, Esther.
So before I'm handing the moderation to Satang, I just would like to congratulate you on this extraordinary and timely work. And I would like to ask a couple of questions, Satang, about the motivation and the coverage of the book. It is really an extraordinary collection of essays, offering a very comprehensive, rigorous, and unique examination of the complex landscape surrounding FGM in Africa, and with particular attention to criminalization. I just told all of you that when I was reading this book, I really thought that I'm really holding an extraordinary book in hand, because it was a long time that I haven't read a legal approach in the context of such a complex, multidisciplinary approach about culture and consent and cultural and religious practices and research and medicalization. So Satang, I would like to ask about the motivation of the book, and how do you see the political momentum that it has been published now and you put together now?
Yeah. No, thank you. And you know, I was just a shepherd of the process. So all the contributing authors obviously make the piece and the volume fantastic in that sense. But in terms of both the motivation and the moment as well, I think partly, you know, obviously, as you all know, there exists a vast literature in relation to the eradication of FGM. However, I think part of our interest was really around this idea of how then do we critically analyze the dominant narratives and the dominant discourse around the issue around FGM, and going beyond just the human rights lens, just the beyond the crime and punishment model, obviously, especially when we think about the broader SRHR issues. Obviously, using criminal law has its limitation, right? In incident spaces, obviously, we know it works against women. And so part of the interest really was to say, and obviously very much supported by the late Professor Charles Nguena, who the book is dedicated to, was really around this idea of getting outside of my comfort zone, right? My comfort zone obviously is the human rights lens, right? Is saying that countries globally, we know that more than 60 countries globally have anti-FGM laws, including more than 25 countries in Africa. But part of it is also looking at the other hand and saying, okay, we have all of these laws, fantastic, but then the prevalence rate continues to be high. What is the disconnect between the two? And so what we really wanted to do was to contribute an Africa focus, Africa centric, but also utilizing both a feminist as well as a decolonial lens to perhaps bring in new insights into this as well. And I think the political momentum as well is really in terms of the global political backlash against gender equality, right? Particularly, yes, the book cover is fantastic. It's beautiful. You can see that. But when we look at the political backlash, especially around gender equality, part of what we see, obviously, is that countries have made progress, obviously, in terms of having the laws. But in the case of Kenya, for instance, which we highlighted in the book, there was an attempt, for instance, by a medic, a doctor, who went to court to say that the anti-FGM law obviously violates her fundamental rights. And so really around the idea of consent, right? The High Court obviously came back and said that FGM and reaffirmed the international norms and standards that FGM is a human rights violation. I am originally from the Gambia, which a couple of people know here, but Gambia is a very small country, West Africa. And we are seeing the political backlash as it relates to FGM, right? So last year, the Gambia attempted to be the first country globally to decriminalize FGM. That failed, even though currently we have a case ongoing at the Supreme Court of the Gambia. And just a couple of weeks ago, a 1-month-old baby died from the practice itself. So it's more than just a theoretical and an academic conversation. This is really millions of lives at risk in relation to their lives as well. And so really the book comes at a very crucial time where we're really thinking about how we go beyond just using the laws. Obviously, those are fantastic, having countries ratify international and regional human rights instruments, having national laws, but really trying to engage in, especially beyond the legal context, to examine the complexities of criminalizing FGM, particularly thinking about emerging areas such as medicalization of FGM, which we will talk about, but also when we have the law in place, what then must be done as well.
Satang, you have 4 parts of the book and 13 chapters, and we are so privileged of having 4 of you here as chapter authors. Can you say a couple of words about these chapters, the compilation, how it comes together?
Sure, yeah. So just to say, so the book itself emerged from a colloquium that we organized, right, a couple of years ago. So the book itself has been a long time coming, and I did appreciate the contributing authors, their patience and their commitment to this project. Obviously, it's a long-term project, but also very important as well. As you rightly said, so it's 13 chapters, including chapter 1 is just my introductory chapter, and we were very lucky to have Professor Farida Banda do the foreword as well, a fantastic African feminist as well. And so with the 13 chapters and looking at the 4 parts, really the idea was really looking at the issue around FGM, especially looking around the limits of criminalization and the politicization of criminalization from different facets. And so just to say as well that when you look at the contributing authors, one of the things that we were very intentional about was making it interdisciplinary, right? So you didn't just have lawyers, obviously, as contributing authors, but you also have folks that were from the medical professionals. We also had practitioners and advocates as well as scholars. And part of that interest is really to say that given the complexities of the issue of FGM, obviously having that interdisciplinary perspective and multidisciplinary approach to addressing it obviously is vital as well. And so when we looked at the 4 parts, some of the parts explored the cultural context, but also the prevention efforts as well. And that's really where we're very grateful to have Angela's contribution, and she'll talk a little bit about that as well. We did also have a section looking at both the ethical as well as the legal dimension, and Samuel's chapter, especially on the issue of medicalization of FGM, also was central as well. I am biased, but this is my favorite chapter because I think my favorite part as well, because I do think it's important when we are thinking about FGM, especially in terms of centering the survivor voices, right? So part 3, for instance, focused on both survivor narratives as well as feminist perspective. And so we actually do have an FGM survivor from the Gambia who did a piece both in terms of setting the context as to the FGM ban, but also obviously the political dynamics and the backlash that we've seen. But I think more importantly as well is sharing her own lived experiences as it relates to FGM, both in terms of the health consequences, but also obviously the psychological trauma that she continues to obviously face as well. And then the last part was really looking at both the legal cases, but also the societal responses as well. And there we also had, Laura's piece, as well as other pieces that really focus around both, for instance, in the Kenyan context, looking at the high burden of proof when it comes to litigating and prosecuting FGM cases, but also the ongoing conversation and debate around cultural relativism, right, and connecting it to that. So fantastic collection. I think we did really good, if I can say so myself, in terms of having just these diverse folks from around the world, globally, obviously, but very much focused around an Africa-centric and Africa-focused perspective as well.
Thank you, Satang. So over to you.
Okay, so over to me. So how we're going to do this is that, many thanks again, Esther, for the intro part. So I will host the rest of today's discussion and conversation. And I'm delighted, as Esther rightly said, to re-echo my thanks and appreciation to Angela, Samuel, as well as Laura for being here, but also obviously for being very patient over the past couple of years, really working on the different pieces as well, which are very unique and contribute to this as well. We'll kickstart with Angela, who in her chapter, Research and FGM Prevention, Evidence from Africa, argues that research is absolutely crucial for addressing FGM. Obviously, we have University of Dayton students here, so research and the utility of research, especially action research around prevention, is vital. And so in terms of your own intervention and reflection as well is really thinking about how do we go beyond just measuring the problem of FGM, but really using and utilizing research in terms of empowering communities to leave FGM behind. And from your own work as well as the chapter, what successful or evidence-based approaches have you seen that can go beyond obviously just the legal framework? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Satang, and good evening, good morning, everyone to you. So thanks for the question. I suppose if I could just start by saying that in my view, the purpose of research is to fundamentally try and change or improve society. So this means that we need to generate or advance knowledge on FGM to reach that SDG target 5.3 to eliminate all harmful practices, including FGM. So, but however, it's no longer enough just to generate this knowledge and disseminate it in scholarly journals. As much as I love this book and it's really important, we actually have to go beyond that. So researchers need to also engage with all the stakeholders to select meaningful and relevant questions for study and contribute to applying this knowledge in the real world. So we need to make sure that research evidence is used to benefit individuals and their communities and deliver that real impact to prevent FGM and empower healthy and well communities. So I suppose that while research can do more than measuring the problem, as you point out there, Satang, or rather describing it, this is actually an important part of the process because we need that baseline knowledge to help us co-design appropriate interventions to bring about the change that's needed. So in fact, descriptive research is key to building a picture. So this could include descriptive research of FGM practices, the type, the prevalence. I know Samuel's going to talk about medicalization, where descriptive research can be helpful. It can help us understand knowledge and attitudes, clinical presentations, laws, and the number of criminal convictions, if that's what we're interested in. But this descriptive knowledge exists along a pathway to intervention research that's about trialing different strategies to prevent FGM and achieve that behavioural change. So if we want research to present evidence for change that can be translated into policy and practice, we need to ask a range of questions and ensure that we use a variety of study methods. So if I can, I'd like to talk about two different dimensions. One dimension that describes the different types of FGM research questions that we can ask, and another that helps describe the different types of prevention research that can be explored to end FGM. So first, let's consider different questions. So I suppose these questions can go from the descriptive to the applied. And that might be questions along the lines of prevalence, causation. We could ask questions about prognosis, etc., all the way through to intervention questions. So starting with those prevalence questions, they can be seen as measurement ones. Again, that descriptive research that can determine the occurrence or the condition or the likelihood of exposure. And what's really important in our research is the demographic health survey and multiple indicator cluster surveys, or MICS, that are nationally representative household surveys that help us identify prevalence, different types of FGM, attitudes, and intergenerational change. Now, women are mostly asked, and sometimes men, about their own experiences of FGM, their daughter's status, their beliefs about continuation and community norms. So together, this descriptive or measurement data can provide really important insights into countries and over time. And in the legal side, we've got descriptive studies that have summarised laws across 28 African countries to help provide us with comparative insights. Another type of question is a causation question. So that helps us determine if particular factors are related to the development of a situation or a condition or an issue. So one really important study in the area of FGM is that is an example of this, is a large multi-country study published in The Lancet that showed that women with FGM, particularly type 3, had significantly high risks of obstructed labour, caesarean section, bleeding after birth, and sadly death. This type of question has been used in legal research as well. There's a lovely PhD study by Patel that drew on DHS data and the timing of the Senegalese and Kenyan laws to try and obtain a causal estimate of the impact of these laws on the likelihood of FGM. So he identified effects or positive momentum and changing norms, but of course there are other factors that impact change. And just quickly on the prognosis questions, that's about predicting individual outcomes over time, and they're kind of limited in the field of FGM, but there's a range of systematic reviews and cohort studies and the like that can give us some insight into various physical, obstetric, gynecological, mental health consequences of women who've undergone FGM. Diagnostic or screening questions have helped us develop tools. For example, a lovely tool in East African, in Kenya, from Kenya, that's been used to identify women who've undergone FGM or who are maybe at risk. But there are a number of gaps in validating those tools. We can look at intervention questions, which often use RCTs. They're sadly very few and far between in the area of FGM. There's observational studies and case reports that have been used to build a case. This is one example in the area of defibrillation, which has been, drawing on 67 studies to show that defibrillation reduces the risk of C-sections and perinatal tears. And in fact, that's been incorporated into our WHO guidelines. There are a few cluster RCTs in the field. A very nice one recently published looking at patient-centered communication, again, has been drawn into WHO Facilitators Guide for Training Healthcare Professionals. So that's our question dimension. And if I can come to the second, which is a way of understanding how research can contribute to the prevention of FGM from my own discipline, public health, looking at different levels of prevention, from the primordial level, where we look at social and economic policies that might affect health, primary prevention, where we might target risk factors, secondary prevention, and then finally tertiary prevention. A beautiful example of this primordial level prevention studies in FGMC is the Toston Community Empowerment Program in West Africa. This is a real flagship example where community-led change concerned with addressing social determinants of health, including education, problem solving, women's rights and human rights, basically has been implemented in over 6,000 communities across largely West Africa, where people have pledged to end the practice. At the primary prevention studies largely include evaluations of community education, alternative and non-harmful rites of passage, and obviously legal research that's drawn on qualitative studies to examine how legislation has not only driven the practice underground in some studies such as Ghana, but increased awareness of the need to end FGMC. Social marketing strategies as well in that primary area, Salema evaluations have been really, really useful to improve our understanding of communication and its effect in ending FGM. Secondary studies focus really on safeguarding measures to protect girls, person-centered antenatal care that I mentioned before, and health professional training. While tertiary studies, prevention studies, have focused on defibrillation, I've mentioned, psychological interventions, especially CBT and counselling, but this is very under-researched. And then there is some work in clitoral reconstruction, but remains controversial because despite some individual benefits, the overall evidence is pretty thin. So there are a number of limitations in the research that we have at the moment. Weak study designs, cross-sectional quasi-experimental pre-post-test designs that don't really deliver rigorous evidence for us, weak internal validity and so on, that provides that brings in selection bias, issues about representative nature of the population. So if we're going to demonstrate progress towards SDG target 5.3, then we really need coordinated mixed method studies that are underpinned by research. And I suppose this brings me to what is best practice high quality FGM research that you've hinted at before there, Satang. And I suppose we really need to ensure we've got ethical practice, respect for participants, they're free to withdraw, their confidentiality is assured. We must bring in an intersectional lens, understanding how the different gender, sex, ethnicity, class, etc. affects power and FGM decision making. We must involve stakeholders in co-design and the co-production of FGM research, where communities set the agenda and guide the process. And researchers really have a duty here to build the capacity of communities through training alongside the research work and also into the academy. We need to finally embrace complexity and scale, not do small one-off fragmented studies if we're really going to make a difference. We need to incorporate questions about effectiveness, appropriateness, feasibility of study to ensure their merit and sustainability. And I suppose coming full circle, this highlights that only one approach to prevention, such as law or legal strategies alone, even really robust ones, are unlikely to eliminate FGM without concurrent societal change, purposeful implementation, and of course, rigorous research. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Angela. I know this is just a couple of minutes, but you sort of gave us the range of research methods, and I think very useful for the students in this space as well, just in terms of just going beyond our disciplines in terms of methods and thinking about the utility of mixed method research and how obviously those can play, support each other as well. And just one thing I think on, and I think I mentioned it before, but really how we do research, right? In terms of our ethical commitment to ensuring that we do research with communities and not on communities, right? So really using and leveraging, and here at the University of Dayton Human Rights Center, we do quite a lot of that, especially around action research and leveraging the resources of the university in terms of true action research that can be useful for the people doing work on the ground. And so many thanks again for the expose rather of the chapter, and obviously there is a lot there as well for folks to read. So please, the book is open access, and the link is in the chat as well. So many thanks again, Angela. And moving on to Samuel, very much connected, adjacent in terms of Angela's piece, which was already mentioned in terms of the complexities as well. One of the most urgent issue, obviously, as we think about approaches to addressing FGM, right? The legal approach is there. There is a lot there on conversation around the medical approach. And obviously that has led us to the discourse around the medicalization of FGM, which your chapter focused on, both in terms of what are the ethical dimensions as we think about it. And so in terms of your own perspective and reflection on this, but also how, especially given the very recent WHO guidelines that we have around healthcare providers' engagement around addressing this issue, and what the health system obviously can do in terms of tackling this problem. Over to you.
Thank you, Satang, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to speak on medicalization, and this is a chapter 5 in the book. And for us to define medicalization is where FGM is performed by any cadre of healthcare profession, whether in the hospital, in the clinic, or even at home. But it also involves another type of FGM where, for example, women who have gone through type 3 FGM, what we call infibrillation, when they go for medical interventions, that infibrillation is opened up. That opening is called de-infibrillation to help the women give birth or maybe go through gynecological procedure. So some of the women, when that has happened, they come back to the healthcare workers, maybe after a week or a month, and they want the medical doctor to close them back. That is what we call re-infibrillation. It doesn't have any medical benefit. When it is done, it is referred to as medicalization. So what we know about medicalization is a growing problem. I think right now the data that we have from UNICEF talks about 230 million women living with FGM. But in those under those 230 million, a lot of other women have undergone medicalization, and we have seen this rising. And it is very common in like 6 countries, for example, Kenya, Sudan, Egypt, Djibouti, Guinea, and Nigeria. Those are the countries with the highest burden of medicalization. So, and one thing I should say here is there is no medical profession or medical healthcare profession who has been trained to perform FGM. There is no curriculum for training medical doctors, midwives, and nurses to perform FGM. So the question here is, what skills or knowledge would medical professionals be applying when they undertake cutting of the gauze through medicalization? For me, healthcare workers would be exposing women and girls to more risk because they have not been trained, and therefore they perpetuate the harm instead of undertaking do no harm. They go against the Hippocratic oath. They go against the oath they take to protect women and girls. But even more importantly, healthcare workers are supposed to advance human rights, especially the right to health. And by performing medicalization, they're actually perpetuating harm. And that is some of the ethical issues they encounter. The second thing is there is a narrative that is being pushed around that healthcare workers do know how to perform FGM. That narrative is wrong. Our evidence right now shows us a lot of curriculum that we have for midwives and nurses, as well as medical doctors, do not contain enough content to address FGM. And therefore, of course, one of the things that we, for example, we are doing in Kenya and in many other countries, we are making sure that in our training, and that speaks to one of the interventions that we are implementing in the health system, is to train the healthcare workers on how to prevent and respond to FGM. So by doing that, we inculcate knowledge around anatomy of the genitalia. We make sure that we also address the issues of human rights violation, the legal aspect, but also very importantly, professional ethics. So under ethics, one of the things we know, for example, is medicalization, as has been known, has been driven by one of the narratives, which is FGM is associated with health complications. And therefore, communities go to healthcare workers to address those health complications. So to our surprise, we have actually come to realize that healthcare workers actually do even cause more harm. And these women also end up having bleeding, they end up having infections, they also have injuries around the genitalia, and it can actually lead to death. We have incidences where girls have died and documented cases in Egypt, despite that FGM has been performed by medical doctors. But even more importantly is the long-term complications. Medicalized FGM doesn't protect women and girls against long-term complications. And these long-term complications are gynecological in nature. For example, keloids. We know, for example, people of African origin are more at risk of getting keloids. And therefore, when you touch the external genitalia, even with a surgical blade from the hospital, the chances of them getting keloids will be high, and that is a long-term complications. Psychological complications and mental health complications are not protected, are not prevented when you do medicalization. And the last one is, of course, the sexual complications that we know most of the time. The external genitalia, especially the clitoris, is very rich with the nerves. In fact, evidence point that we have more than 10,000 nerves. So it means even if you touch with a pin or even with a needle, then you are going to be injuring hundreds of nerves that can either lead to pain or even insensitivity when it comes to sexual issues. So those are some of the complications that I would want to speak about. But more importantly, when it comes to ethics, some of the issues we discuss about ethics is the issue of the do no harm. That is very particularly because healthcare workers do take an oath to protect women and girls. The other one is, of course, the issue of the consent. So we ask ourselves, do women who present themselves for FGM do really provide consent for FGM to be performed by the healthcare? And the answer here is no. First of all, FGM is done mostly on girls who are minor, so they don't have the capacity to give assent or even to give consent. And number two, even women who get exposed to medicalized FGM, they are not going for FGM voluntarily. They are actually because of coercion. They are actually from pressure. They are coming in because the culture is prohibiting them to participate in community activities, and therefore there is no what you call competent consent coming from the survivors, and therefore even the healthcare workers, we know. Ideally, when healthcare workers are undertaking procedures or what we call surgical procedures, they need to have explained the benefits and the risk of the procedure. But in FGM, we don't see that happening. Most of the time, the healthcare workers are going to be silent because their motivation is actually financial. The other issue is around the, for example, healthcare workers are supposed to operate on the best interest of the girls and women. So the question is, when a medical doctor performs FGM, are they performing it for the best interest of the girl or the women? Of course, they would be saying, "Oh, we are complying to culture," but by the end of the day, this culture is also causing more harm than good because girls end up having all the health complications. They live with the trauma and they continue to suffer. And the last one, of course, we are saying. As healthcare workers, they need to be protectors of vulnerable people in the population. And girls and women are actually vulnerable, especially the poor who are not very educated. And they have a right to be told what does that procedure mean? What do the impacts around FGM mean? And therefore, healthcare workers in this situation, we find that they are not interested to telling people the complications that can come with FGM because they want to take advantage and maybe they want to benefit financially. And the last one is, of course, around the issue of the duty to report. FGM in most countries, and the speakers who are ahead of me have already alluded to it, is actually prohibited. And prohibition also means that most of the countries, like in Kenya, all forms of FGM, including medicalization, is actually prohibited. So what does it mean? For a medical doctor or even a healthcare worker, it means if you come across a girl who have undergone FGM, especially the fresh FGM, you are supposed to report to the law enforcement. So would medical doctors or even healthcare workers who are involved in medicalization be in a position to report on this? No, because there will be obviously conflict of interest because themselves, they are also perpetuating the FGM. So there is clearly an issue of conflict of interest, which is an ethical issue. The final one, and it has been alluded by Professor Angela, is the issue of the female genital cosmetic surgeries. We have seen a very thin line between medicalization and female genital cosmetic surgeries. And to us, for example, from when you look at what is happening in Egypt, a lot of women are going in to see medical doctors or seeking female cosmetic surgeries, but behind those clinics, a lot of FGM is being performed. And therefore, when we come to recommending what do we need to do in the health system, one of the things we need to be very deliberate is actually developing training resources and tools that can be able to train medical doctors to be able to be competent enough to respond, but also be able to prevent FGM, including medicalization. And the training manual should emphasize on the health complications of both FGM performed by traditional cutters, but also emphasize on FGM performed by healthcare workers. But importantly, it should also include the issue of human rights. And human rights here, the emphasis must be in line with the global human rights approach, which speak to zero tolerance to all forms of FGM, including medicalization. And then the other issue should be emphasis on professional ethics, that FGM and medicalized FGM is unprofessional, and therefore doctors and healthcare workers must be reminded to adhere to the professional ethics. The other thing that we are recommending, and we have been practicing this in Kenya, is capacity building. And here, capacity building, we talk about integration. And integration, we are talking about making sure that we structure and increase the content on FGM especially on the best practices in terms of addressing FGM from prevention in the curriculum for medical doctors, nurses, and midwives. Through this, we know that, therefore, we are going to produce the next generation of healthcare workers who are competent, who are knowledgeable, and who can be able to be champions and advocates against FGM. The other issue that we are also talking about is making sure that we integrate end FGM interventions into the health system. And here we are talking about making sure that even as women interact with the health system, they must start to be educated, they must start to be counseled, they must start to be given quality care in the antenatal, in the family planning, in the maternity and labor wards, so that these messages stick to them and they can be able to protect the future girls against the FGM. And lastly, as as I wind, we need to engage the professional association and regulatory bodies so that it can sanction healthcare workers who participate in perpetuating medicalization. And of course, this will require us to work with the stakeholders, including the Ministry of Health, people in the legal fraternity and the law enforcement, so that we can be able to maybe apprehend one or two doctors or midwives who are performing this, and this can serve as a deterrent to those who are performing medicalization. And of course, making sure that we can withdraw the licenses of those who participate in performing medicalization as a way of deterring from this. And finally, making sure that we have very quality and current evidence around medicalization and what interventions are working, so that we can be able to replicate them along in all areas. And finally, as I stop, then we need to emphasize around zero tolerance. Of course, zero tolerance in all sectors, but more importantly, making sure that people who are supposed to advance human rights, like medical doctors and healthcare workers, are not the ones who are perpetuating medicalization. So as I conclude, medicalization is a sticking problem, especially when it comes to FGM. We are not going to fight to win the war against the FGM if we are not going to address medicalization. And medicalization is well linked to many other emerging issues around FGM, and some of them are like cross-border FGM. We are talking about FGM tourism, where, for example, people come from the global West and they practice FGM in Kenya and they go back with their daughters who are cut. It is also associated with, now in Kenya, we have started to see women who are mature being cut, and they are being performed FGM when they are giving birth by the healthcare workers and also the midwives. We have started to see girls who are extremely young being performed FGM, because the interventions we have put in place have actually had an impact in the community, and communities are evolving and mutating and coming up with innovation on how to continue performing this, and they perform it on girls who don't have the agency to refuse to be cut. And therefore, the best people who are doing this will be the medical doctors. So, and finally, as I speak, we don't know and we don't have evidence what type of FGM medicalization is in terms of the severity, in terms of the amount of tissues that is removed. But what we know and what we get from the community, they say that healthcare workers are likely to perform less severe type of FGM, which now requires us to do more research to get what we call clinical data, objective data that can show us what the problem really looks like. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you. Thank you so much, Samuel, for the chapter, but also for your intervention today as well. I think, it is a very timely addition to the piece as well, especially as you rightly said, when we look at the emerging trends around FGM. Obviously, medicalization is one, but other things that you also mentioned with the cross-border, the vacation cutting, the early cutting, are all issues obviously related to this. But what also comes out as well is that the health-only approach is not enough by itself, right? And so that brings us to the next speaker, Laura. I know we already talked about the legal approach is limited, right? But your chapter, especially on the case study of Uganda, shows both their potential and perhaps the limitation of law and using the legal system as well. And so if you could share a little bit in terms of key lessons. And I know you also occupy a very unique space. You very recently were the chair of the UN Working Group addressing discrimination against women and girls. And so also, you know, from that work from a global perspective, really thinking about challenges that remain, even making sure that laws are being able to translate into practical protection for women and girls on the ground. So over to you, Laura. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Satang. The fight to abolish FGM in Uganda through legal channels started with the constitutional petition that was filed in 2007. As you know, the fight had been through ultra-legal means, but specifically the law and advocacy for women in Uganda case that was filed against Uganda's Attorney General was a game changer. This NGO challenged FGM as being contrary to the rights and protections provided under Uganda's 1995 constitution, which happens to be really progressive in many areas. So in July 2010, the Constitutional Court ruled that FGM violates the rights to life, dignity, and freedom from cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, and declared the practice unconstitutional. So notably, this landmark ruling was actually preceded by Parliament adopting the Prohibition of FGM Act in December 2009, which the President assented to in March 2010. So you have a scenario where there's strong political will for this law from the executive, legislature, and judiciary that led to its quick passage, actually. And we believe that the strong political will also derived from part of the communities that were affected by FGM, particularly because elders from one of the two key practicing tribes attended the parliamentary sessions to consider the law in the debates, and they were also already key players at the local level. They had participated in passing bylaws for FGM abandonment and also declaration. So you see alignment on this issue from really critical players, marking significant legal and policy progress in Uganda's efforts to combine FGM. But do we see alignment from the affected communities? Instead, we see that this law had a very polarizing effect, and it plays into how the law has actually been implemented. So yes, successful interest litigation to end FGM in Uganda happened. However, it signaled only the beginning or continuation, but definitely not the end of the results sought. So during the parliamentary debates held to pass this law, the parliamentarians, one of the parliamentarians who actually was the champion, wisely noted that having a law would not necessarily end the practice of FGM, and these words became prophetic. So while the constitutional case and the legislation have been celebrated as significant achievements, in practice, there are conceptual and enforcement challenges that warrant a reflection. And I wanted to focus on three key areas. One is the gap between the legal concept and its enforcement. Where female genital mutilation is embraced as a cultural norm in these tribes, externally imposed laws are conceived and perceived as a form of ethnic chauvinism. They are framed as a coercive attempt to undermine tribal autonomy, identity, and heritage, breeding the concept of othering. Actually, I was stunned to see that the elders of this tribe lodged a petition with Uganda's Human Rights Commission saying that their right to culture was being violated by the existence of this law. So this shows you the dynamic that can foster defensive postures, where communities are seeking to shield their traditions from an external judgmental gaze, a process that we all know is sociologically termed as othering. Now, the resulting tension between legal frameworks and cultural norms has created a significant enforcement gap. Since 2010, convictions under this law has been exceedingly rare. And actually, during COVID, there was a huge forced FGM event where hundreds of victims were publicly circumcised by force. Also, you have the perverse situation where victims are prosecuted because they have embraced FGM as their cultural right. And so as a result of all this, criminalization is driving the practice underground, leading to clandestine FGM events, but also cross-border collaborations between Uganda and Kenya and Tanzania among the communities that hold the custom dear. Secondly, I'd like to talk about the persistent social acceptance of FGM. It creates a powerful incentive where the perceived social payoffs for compliance significantly outweigh the risks of legal sanction. So there's a compliance deficit. In these societies, the practice is deeply embedded within the social fabric, but it also awards critical benefits to the women and girls who undergo it, such as cultural legitimacy. These girls can attend public events, they can speak at them, they can attend circumcision of men, they can participate in societal events, and they're eligible for marriage. Whereas on the other side, non-compliance triggers severe social and economic ostracization, but also exclusion from vital communal activities and spaces. For example, women cannot go to the kraal, they cannot touch the food in the communal granary. So you can imagine that this devastates a woman's or girl's livelihood and social standing. And yet, the government's presence in these private spaces is often absent in the communal sphere, leaving a vacuum that entrenched social norms fill and which become the ultimate authority. So in these communities where FGM is the ultimate authority, women and girls are going to bend the knee and embrace this. And that brings me to the third point of intersectionality. Intersectionality, as we know, is key to understanding women and girls' experiences and not excluding those facing FGM. Gender, culture, age, socioeconomic status, and several other factors, the list is endless, all play a significant role. These factors, when they intertwine, create unique, overlapping, and cumulative challenges and experiences and vulnerabilities. So often, choices of women and girls on to undergo FGM are made within deeply patriarchal structures and settings. This then ends up blurring the line between consent and coercion. And this is especially true when considering their autonomy of individuals within their own communities. So on top of that, we talked about the fact that this will mostly happen in the rural areas. The two practicing communities are in the rural areas. So this is where the communities are underserved in terms of education and health. So many of the women and girls remain unaware, first of all, that there is a law against FGM. And the issues that Samuel talked about, they are unaware of this because they know that for centuries, this practice has been going on and women have survived. So even where they're unwilling, even where women and girls unwillingly undergo FGM in the rural areas, they often lack resources to accept law enforcement agencies, legal aid, and state protection. This further increases their vulnerabilities. So these are the realities under which the case was passed and under which women must either obey the law that is so far removed from their lived realities daily, or obey the immediate law of the community in which they are living in daily. So this brings me to the last question. Beyond the laws, what else exists? When a parliament or a court bans a cultural practice or declares it harmful, how are the communities that practice it viewing these judgments? Many African nations, including Uganda, have strict laws against FGM, but they face weaker enforcement for some of the reasons that I've gone into. And this disconnect forces us to ask, can laws alone really change deeply rooted traditions, or do we need a different approach, one that works with communities rather than against them? And that's how they see it. They see the law as being against them, especially because it is tribe or tribe specific. The tribes that are undergoing FGM are specific. It's not a cross-cutting issue across all the tribes. Now, strategic interest plays a crucial role, as I explained in the Ugandan case, in setting legal precedents and driving policy reforms against FGM. But that's not the end of the story. Lasting change requires more than just laws. It demands deep community engagement. And in 2014, when the government engaged with the community, for example, and had dialogues, it sensitization, working with chiefs, about 120 chiefs engaged in community abandonment, public abandonment events where they said this is really bad. So you see that to truly end FGM, we must encourage communities to critically examine the practice through the lens of gender equality, but also human rights. And effective strategies should combine legal measures. Yes, we do need the laws, they're good, but they should be combined with community-led education, economic empowerment for women. And let's not forget that some of the women who are involved in FGM, for them, it is what they do. It is where they derive their money from, as Samuel has said. And public health initiatives that shift the conversation towards well-being. Sustainable progress depends on addressing both the legal and social components of FGM, ensuring efforts are culturally sensitive to avoid resistance and to foster genuine cooperation. So we need to reduce the focus on othering and span the divide and talk to the women and men and the communities in a way that they understand. Closing the gap between legislation and the lived realities of women and girls is essential for meaning long-term impact. Thank you so much, Satang.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much for, illustrating, obviously in the Ugandan context, but which is very true of a lot of places. As we said, more than 25 African countries now have anti-FGM law, and globally more than 60 countries do. And especially in terms of both examining the potential, but also the peril of legal frameworks and laws as well. And many thanks to Sophia for the reminder. But a good example, for instance, of what we've seen in Kenya and recent work that we supported with ABA Rule of Law and the Clooney Foundation for Justice Trial Watch, looking and monitoring prosecution in Kenya. Evidence shows that at least more than half of the people that are being prosecuted are actually the victims themselves, right? So the potential that even though there might exist strong legal frameworks, that the possibility of the legal frameworks also re-victimizing the victims and prosecuting those as well, given the no-zero approach. So really thinking about how not just to have the strong legal frameworks and the laws in place, but obviously also how those are executed as well, centering the importance of protecting the victims and the survivors of FGM as well. I know we're almost at time, and I don't know where the time went, Esther. And so I wanted to give it back to you, but I think for me, part of the conclusion and the implication, both in the book, but also from this conversation as well, given that, as we indicated in the book, especially with the political backlash that we've seen, with the emerging trends that are currently happening and unfolding as well, that part of the takeaway, and this is nothing new per se, right, but obviously contextual in the book itself, is to say that no single approach obviously works, right? The health approach is not the only approach. The legal approach, as I already indicated, just with the example of Kenya, is not enough, but multifaceted approach that really also centers the communities, but also the survivors as well. And so this conversation obviously is not the end. It is just the beginning. And the book, we hope, can serve as a call for sort of a critical reevaluation of the approaches to how we deal with the issue and move away from just a single approach or a siloed approach to addressing the issue itself. But I also need to note, and that is why very intentionally, the book, FGM in Africa, Politics of Criminalization and not Limits of Criminalization, because we didn't want it obviously to be a tool for, those that are obviously in support of FGM, is to say that whilst obviously the call is to critically re-examine how we approach the issue around FGM, it is not to throw the baby with the bathwater, right? And that is a direct quote that was given to me by Professor Charles Ngwena as a reminder when we were curating the colloquium as well. And also to say that as an ongoing conversation, obviously part of the idea for the colloquium itself emerged from a piece that I did on the International Journal on Gynecologists and Obstetrics, and Professor Cook, who I think I've seen join the webinar as well, have always been, oh yeah, you need to write more about the law. You need to write more about how we should really think beyond just the law as well, to really, an echo for a call for more nuanced, context-specific approaches that obviously engages on different fronts, whether that's research, community engagement, education, as well as obviously social change initiative. And this is really what the Maputo Protocol, the protocol to on the rights of women in Africa, also calls for as well. So this is just the beginning of a conversation. We appreciate all of you being here, but I'm going to hand it over to Esther and again, many thanks for curating this, but also for the opportunity to share as well a little bit from the contributing authors and myself. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Satang, Laura, Samuel, Angela. Thank you very much for your insights about the book, and thank you very much for this book. In the chat, many of you asked whether the book is open access, and I think it's one of the few books that it's actually open access. We shared the link for that. This webinar will be available on the SRHM website, and our partners are also most welcome to distribute the webinar. And from the SRHM journal perspective, if you read the book, and many of you who are here today are doing research, community practice, working with communities in different countries, it's a very, very rich conversation in the chat. Thank you very much for all your contribution, raising a lot of questions that need further examination. And the SRHM journal would be certainly a place where we would welcome both peer-reviewed articles, but also conversations, also possibly testimonies, book reviews, if anybody is interested to writing a review about the book, blog pieces. So we definitely in SRHM would like to provide a platform for fertile knowledge, documentation, but also conversation. So thank you so much, Satang, Samuel, Angela, and Laura, and thank you for everyone who attended this webinar. Have a good evening, continuation of the day. Good night, Angela. And thank you for the students for attending in person as well. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.